Have you ever used Find a Grave? It's a weird name for a website, but today we are going to be talking about how to use Find a Grave to find and share family stories. And so we're going to cover some basics about just how to get logged into Find a Grave, what Find a Grave is. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of Find a Grave, how you can use it best, how it interfaces with Ancestry, and then some of the little features you might not be aware of on the website. So that's what we're going to cover today. I'm Krista Cowan. I'm the corporate genealogist here at Ancestry, and I show up here every Wednesday for our free Ancestry virtual events. You can learn more about those at ancestry.com/education. So let's talk about Find a Grave. Before we dive into all the meaty goodness about what's available on that website, I would love to hear from you in the chat if you are watching this live, or in the comments if you are watching this on YouTube. What is your most burning question about Find a Grave? What is it that you would like to know more about? Maybe you're brand new and you don't know anything about it at all. Maybe you've used Find a Grave a little bit, but you have some specific questions. Either way, I would love to know what your questions are. And so I'm just going to skim through those really quickly here live. So Evelyn wants to know how to get more out of it and how much to trust it. Joanna wants to know what can be gained from it. Thomas wants to know how to find missing people. Lisa wants to know how to find a person without knowing what cemetery they're in. Donna wants to sign up to be a Find a Grave volunteer and know how to do that. Deborah wants to know how to best correct errors and provide documentation for that. Allison wants to know, Allison and I have the same last name. Allison wants to know why some additional detail in the cemeteries in the UK aren't included, or how to find that. Peggy can't find anyone she's looking for, so it sounds like Peggy wants some help with searching. And let's see, accuracy. Seeing lots of questions about how accurate it is. Can I trust it? How to search. What about virtual cemeteries? Okay, this is fantastic. You guys are asking, I think, all the right questions. C: is a total newbie. Okay, well, C: we're going to take care of you first. So let's talk a little bit about what Find a Grave is and what Find a Grave isn't. So Find a Grave was started a couple decades ago by a gentleman who was interested in documenting the burial places of celebrities. And he started, I think, with a cemetery in Hollywood, actually, and documenting the final resting places of these celebrities and famous people. I think originally he started with celebrities in the entertainment industry, but then kind of branched out from there. And so it was this homegrown website. It was kind of this little passion project of his. And then people started submitting, like they wanted to share famous people buried in cemeteries near where they lived. Or they started asking, what about this famous person? Where are they buried? And so over time, it opened up to be a volunteer-based platform where individuals could submit the photos of tombstones and information about the final resting places for famous people, politicians, sports figures, local celebrities. And then it morphed into, what if we documented the final burial place of everyone? Anybody in any cemetery, anywhere. And tapophiles around the world jumped on it. Now, a tapophile is the word that we use for somebody who loves cemeteries. And I have been someone who loves cemeteries since I was a kid. I grew up where we had to walk kind of past a cemetery or through a cemetery some days to get to the school bus to go to high school. And my birthday is the day after Halloween. And so I have spent many a birthday doing cleanup projects in cemeteries after, unfortunately, people have done Halloween night vandalism. That has always seemed like a good community service opportunity for my birthday. I love every time I go anywhere, I love just going to the local cemetery because it gives you a flavor for what that community is like and what they value and how they view death. One of my favorite places to visit cemeteries is in New Orleans. Every time I go visit family there, I have a great great grandmother buried there. And every time I go visit, I make sure to go to the cemetery where she's buried and visit some of the other local cemeteries. But I also love visiting cemeteries like the one here in Salt Lake City that is just massive. Like you can't even imagine how large this cemetery is. It sits up on a hill and there's hills and valleys and rows and named streets. And like, unless you have a guide to the cemetery, you're not finding anyone. I also love visiting cemeteries like the one that I visited with my dad when we went to Hill County, Texas, a year and a half ago for a family reunion. And we drove down this tiny little dirt road and got stuck because it had been muddy. And then after we got unstuck, we found our way to this tiny, tiny little old cemetery where members of our family had been buried for a few generations. And as we walked up and down the little rows, after parking our car outside the gate because you couldn't even get a car inside, it was so tiny, and recognizing the names, and then being honored to take the pictures because those tombstones had not yet been documented. And so that is what Find a Grave has grown into, is this place where tapophiles of all shapes and sizes, of all colors and nationalities, have really gathered together in a spirit of volunteerism to document who's buried in what cemeteries. So the first thing that you need to know about Find a Grave is that it's not created by or for genealogists. It is something we use and we're so grateful that we get to, but it is not its original purpose or what those who volunteer, and there are thousands and thousands of volunteers now, it's not why they do what they do necessarily. Certainly it wasn't in the early years. Now, a few years ago, the gentleman who started Find a Grave wanted to retire and not continue the business side. I mean, Find a Grave is free, but he still had to pay for maintaining the website and do all the administrative work of managing volunteers and customers who are using the website. And I mean, just there was a lot going on, and he did not want to be involved in that anymore. And so he agreed to sell the website to Ancestry. So Ancestry owns Find a Grave. Find a Grave is and always has been free. And so it is a free platform. Ancestry pays to continue to maintain it, but volunteers continue to be the ones who do all the work. And anyone can be a volunteer. So, as I mentioned, standing in this cemetery a year and a half ago with my dad for, after the family reunion, taking pictures of these tombstones and making sure that they are documented. So, the second thing that you need to know is that since Ancestry purchased Find a Grave, there is now a free Find a Grave app. And if you are someone who is going out into cemeteries, you are going to want to get that app onto your phone or your tablet because that is the fastest, easiest way to document who's buried in what cemetery. I can take a photo and upload it immediately into Find a Grave. And if I'm doing that through the mobile app, there are a couple of things that happen. The first, and to me, most important thing is not only does the photo get uploaded immediately to the website, but the GPS coordinates of where I am standing at that exact moment when I take that photo are recorded to the website as well. That might not seem like a big deal if you've already got the cemetery information. But if you've ever been to a cemetery like this little one in Hill County, Texas, where even with directions, it can be a little tricky to find. Having GPS coordinates is super valuable. Or if you're at a cemetery like the one up in Salt Lake City, that is like a small city. It is so massive and there are so many streets. So just knowing someone is buried in the cemetery isn't enough. Having the exact GPS coordinates that can get you within like a 10-foot radius of where that grave actually is becomes invaluable for those of us who are using Find a Grave to go and visit the places where our ancestors are buried. So that's the next thing that I want you to know and to think about and to consider is if you want to volunteer, or even if you want to use Find a Grave to go and visit cemeteries, download the free Find a Grave mobile app onto your phone or tablet so that you have it when you're out in those cemeteries or out looking for the cemetery or for where in the cemetery someone happens to be buried. So anyone can volunteer. And now I'll tell you one of my favorite ways to volunteer, which is when I'm at a cemetery. And sometimes this happens because I'm on a business trip and I went on a business trip to Kansas City earlier this year. And literally our hotel was right next to a cemetery with a little walking path. And so the opportunity to just pull up the Find a Grave mobile app and see how much of that cemetery has been documented. So when you view any cemetery page, and I'll show you in a minute how to do that, when you view any cemetery page in Find a Grave, it will tell you, based on their best knowledge, what percentage of that cemetery has been photographed. Now, if you've been to cemeteries, you know sometimes we know how many people are buried there because the church or the city or the cemetery office or the private people who own the land have provided that information. So we know the total number of burials in the cemetery. And then as people create memorial pages and take photos of tombstones, we know how many of those photos have been uploaded. And so we can provide an approximate percentage of what percentage of that cemetery has been documented. Now, in a lot of old cemeteries, there are not tombstones for every burial. So not every cemetery is going to reach 100% of photos taken. And that's something also to keep in mind as you're wandering around old cemeteries. What tombstones have become buried because they've overgrown? Is there a way you can clear away some of that debris and get a photo? What tombstones exist but have become unreadable because of wear and tear of time or people? Keep that in mind as well. And then what tombstones have completely deteriorated? Maybe because the original tombstone was just a little wooden cross with a name carved into it. And over time, some of those become completely disintegrated. Sometimes people never had a tombstone placed. And that happens more often than you might think. So my paternal grandfather, he died in 2000. And my grandmother, over the course of the next 2 years, we worked with her to help design a tombstone. She wanted a tombstone that would reflect both of them because she was planning on being buried in the same place. And then she just couldn't bring herself to purchase it. And then she got sick. There was no tombstone on my grandfather's grave for 18 years because she just couldn't bring herself to do it. And we prodded her a couple of times, but we didn't want to push the issue. When she passed, we took that design she had created and had a tombstone made and had it placed within months of her passing when she passed in 2018. So there are old burial sites that have no tombstone for whatever reason, and there could be current burial sites that also have no tombstone for whatever reason. And so that is one of the things to keep in mind as you're looking at what percentage of the cemetery has tombstones that have been photographed. But as you're wandering around an old cemetery, whether it's the cemetery down the street from your house, or the cemetery right next to your hotel room as you're on a business trip, or the cemetery in the town where your ancestors were from, where you're visiting for the family reunion, or maybe you're there this weekend for my American friends celebrating Thanksgiving. Pull up the mobile app, take a look at the local cemeteries, and see what percentage have been photographed. The next thing you're going to want to do is look and see if there are any photo requests. So one of the things that happens is as people go looking for their own ancestors, sometimes they know where that person is buried, or they suspect where that person is buried because their burial location is often listed on a death certificate. So one of the things that most death certificates will show you, usually in the bottom right-hand corner, is the name of the mortuary or the undertaker, and then what cemetery the body was removed to. And so people know where the burial was planned or proposed to be. Now, that's not always exactly where the person ended up. And sometimes they ended up there for a while and then the body was moved for whatever reason. But that's usually one of the first clues that people have about where a burial occurred. Obituaries often also list where the burial will be held because it's about not just the funeral, but sometimes also about the graveside service. So that's another clue that you have about where somebody might be buried. So, what often happens is people will figure out where a person is buried, and then they'll go to find a grave to see a photo of the tombstone, and there won't be a photo of the tombstone. Sometimes there's even still a memorial page that lists that we know this person is buried here, but there is no picture attached of the actual tombstone. And so one of the things that you can do on Find a Grave is you can submit a request for someone to take a photo of that tombstone. And God bless all of the volunteers who are so responsive to those photo requests. Just this last week, Ancestry and some of the story producers and myself had the opportunity to go to an event in New York City where we were meeting with several reporters and sharing some family history with them. We had asked them to start filling out a family tree. We had done a little bit more research so that we could share with them how Ancestry works in hopes that they would write about us in their newspaper articles or magazine articles or blog posts. And in doing some research on one of the trees, one of my colleagues found where somebody in this reporter's family was buried, but there was no Find a Grave memorial page in that cemetery for this person. And so she put in a photo request. She put in that photo request on a Sunday. Our event was Tuesday night. As the reporter came up to meet with me so that I could share with her what we'd discovered, that photo request we discovered had been filled the day before. So within 24 hours, a volunteer had seen a photo request for a cemetery near their home and had gone and taken a picture of the tombstone, uploaded it to Find a Grave so that there was now a memorial page in the cemetery with a photo that I could share with this person. And their emotional reaction was actually really, really sweet. There is something about seeing that photo, if you can't visit the cemetery personally, that is a really emotional reaction for a lot of people. So, when I'm out visiting cemeteries, when I go to the local cemetery on a business trip or a family vacation, I always pull up the mobile app and look to see, are there any photo requests for this cemetery? And then can I find that tombstone, get that photo, and get it uploaded directly to the website? I will tell you one other experience and then we'll dive into the website directly. So, as part of that family reunion trip to Texas, my dad and I actually visited several cemeteries. And one of the cemeteries that we'd been looking for his great grandmother and where she was buried. We finally found where she was buried. And when we put in a photo request, they told us there was no tombstone, which happens. There are cemeteries that tombstones, like I said, have just disintegrated or they were never placed to begin with. And so we knew she was buried there from her death certificate, from the obituary, from the church records. We knew because the cemetery was attached to a church, we knew she was buried there. But according to the records of the church, there had never been a tombstone. And so we were kind of sad about that, but we thought we still wanted to visit because she worshiped in the church and several family members had been baptized and buried there in this particular Lutheran church. And so we wanted to visit the church. So we visited the church and then we went out and were walking the cemetery. And I pulled up the Find a Grave mobile app. And one of the things that you can do when you're looking at a cemetery is you can see a list of all the people who are buried here. And so I pulled up a list of all the people buried here because I wanted to see if there were any other surnames I recognized. A lot of people in this small community, this was down in Brenham, Texas, in Washington County, and a lot of people in this small community intermarried, and so I knew a lot of the surnames. And so I just wanted to see who else was buried there. And I saw, my dad's great grandmother listed, and then I noticed that there was a picture. And I pulled it up and there was a tombstone. And so we went wandering through the cemetery and we found her tombstone. And then this man had seen us, I guess. The cemetery is kind of up on a hill, and he had seen us, and he and his wife came rolling up in like a golf cart. And they were the cemetery caretakers. And he said, "We saw you wandering around out here, just wondered if we could help you with anything." And we said, this is our ancestor, and we were told she didn't have a tombstone. And they proceeded to inform us that the church and the community had been raising money so that they could purchase tombstones to make sure that everybody in the cemetery had one. And they had a list, and they still had, I'm going to cry. um, they had a list and they were still raising money and they were still placing tombstones and they still had dozens to place. But this particular ancestor of ours, they had been able to purchase a tombstone for her a couple years earlier. And so now there was a tombstone and a photo of that grave marker on Find a Grave. And I was just so grateful enough that I donated. But also, while I was standing there, I pulled up the photo requests for that cemetery because if they're actively placing new tombstones, I wanted to see, is there anybody else in this cemetery who we know is buried here who doesn't have a tombstone yet or didn't, and can I return this small favor? And so I pulled up the photo request list, and there were 3. And the top one, I opened it up and it listed the name of the woman, and it wasn't a name I recognized. And I am not kidding you. I looked down and this woman was buried next to my great 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 grandmother. And it just felt like a really serendipitous moment. I have a lot of those. You probably do too if you've been involved in family history for any length of time. And so in that moment, I was able to take a photo of her tombstone, upload it directly to Find a Grave, and make sure that her final burial place was documented and that that photo was shared for others. So those are just a couple of my experiences with Find a Grave. If you have had experiences with Find a Grave, I would love, again, if you would share that in the chat if you're watching this live, or in the comments if you're watching the replay on YouTube, because I think there's something really powerful about sharing those experiences with each other as a community, because as new people come into the community, they're going to see your comments and read your experiences, and it might inspire them to volunteer or to put in a photo request, or at the very least to recognize the amazing work of the volunteers who make Find a Grave possible for all of us. Okay, with that said, let me go ahead and we are going to dive into the website and answer some of your other questions because there are, it looks like quite a few, and I want to make sure that we get through all of them. So, Find a Grave is simply findagrave.com. That's how you find it. If you're ever talking about Find a Grave on social media, like you're in a Facebook group or even here in the chat, I just want to remind everybody that is FG, right? We want to leave out that A because in some cultures that is kind of an offensive term. And so we try to avoid that. So FG is the abbreviation for Find a Grave, but it's findagrave.com is the URL to get to the website. Now, everyone, as I mentioned, anyone can contribute. But in order to contribute, you do need to have a login to the website. The website is completely free, but you are going to want to create a login, and then you're going to want to create a profile. Now, here's my profile. The login, you can just create it with your email address. And then you can, if you choose, upload a photo. This is a very, very old photo of me. I have been a member of Find a Grave for more than 11 years with this particular login. Apparently, I haven't done anything contributory on Find a Grave for a while on this particular account. I sometimes have multiple accounts so that I can test things, but you can fill out a full biography here if you want. It will show your contributions. On this particular account, it looks like my contributions are kind of low. Let me make this a little bigger for you, though, so that you understand what the options are. So you can add new memorials. Memorial pages are simply pages that document information about a person and where they are buried. And so it looks like I've created 5 memorial pages with this account. You also can see how many memorials you manage. Now, let's talk about account management for just a minute. I've seen a couple questions fly by in the chat about that. When you create a memorial, you need to make sure that one does not already exist. The terms and conditions on Find a Grave state that there can only be one memorial per person. So when a new memorial is created, the creator becomes the owner and the manager of that memorial page, which means they're responsible, just like being responsible for a cemetery to make sure that it's taken care of. They become responsible for that memorial page. So we love, love, love the volunteers who are so active in creating new memorial pages. However, some of us want to manage the memorial pages of our close family members. So my grandmother, my grandfather, when my parents pass, any of my aunts and uncles, like those are the memorial pages that I likely would want to manage. And if somebody else created it, again, God bless them. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for making the time, taking the effort, going to the cemetery, taking the photo. But I'm going to want to manage that so that I can make sure the information is accurate, so that I can update information as necessary, so that I can link family members to that page. And so I can request access to manage that page. And then that memorial page gets turned over to me to manage. Anyone can request to manage the page of any close family members. So parents, siblings, spouse, children, right? Those are kind of your immediate family, but then also grandparents, aunts and uncles, great grandparents, right? So those kind of next layer of family relationships. So you can request, and again, part of the terms and conditions on the website are that the memorial owner, unless they are also a close family member, they have to turn over management to you. And if they don't, for whatever reason, or if they refuse, or if they are unresponsive, you can request through Find a Grave directly to have the management of that memorial turned over to you. Now, I don't want to manage a lot of memorials. I think my cousin, my first cousin, so we have the same grandparents, he manages the memorial pages for my grandparents, and that's fine. But I do want to be able to suggest edits. And so that is another one of the contributions that you can make on Find a Grave, which is as you find information, if you discover that that information is incorrect or incomplete, you can suggest edits to add or correct information. It is then up to the memorial manager to make those edits and changes. And again, if they don't do it, then you need to work with them to see maybe that person has died, the person who actually manages the page. And so in which case do you need to get management turned over to you from Find a Grave? Or maybe that person is just running behind, right? Everybody doesn't run on our schedule. And so we need to maybe give some people some patience and some grace to make those changes. But if they still are unresponsive, you do have some recourse for making some of those changes. The fact that suggested edits exist, however, brings us to another point, which is the information on Find a Grave is only as accurate as the people who are creating these memorial pages. So much like family trees or a death certificate where the informant was the son-in-law, or a census record where the next door neighbor's the one who gave the information about your family, right? All records have to be evaluated for accuracy based on what you know about the informant and who created that information. So when you ask, and several of you did, can I trust this information? How accurate is this information? The information on a Find a Grave memorial page is only as accurate as the informant and the page manager. And it is no more or less accurate than any other record that we use in family history. All records have to be evaluated based on the evidence that you collect with all other records. So we're always looking for every record we can about a person so that we can validate or verify that the information is correct. So let me just briefly give you a quick little lesson on evidence analysis, because I think this is important, whether you're brand new to family history, great time to learn this lesson, or whether you've been doing family history for a decade or more and think you've got it figured out. This is one of those reminder lessons that I think we all need once in a while. I want you to think about how accurate or inaccurate a census record is. A census record is only as accurate as the person who gave the information, and as accurate as the census taker who wrote the information down as they thought they heard it, and then as accurate as the information that was copied from the census taker's actual notes into the official census record. So we have 3 opportunities for errors to be introduced. Did the person answering the census taker's questions really know, as a 13-year-old girl, what year her father immigrated or exactly how old he was? Did she really know what his first name was, or did she just remember what everybody called him? Did she really remember how old all her older brothers and sisters were, some of whom were out of the house before she even, was old enough to remember? Did she really remember, how old her younger sibling was and exactly, what year they were born? Or when her, where her grandparents were born? Think about all the information on a census and we don't know who's providing that information. So when you evaluate a census record, you very often have to evaluate it in concert with all the other census records. But when you put those all together, and then you add in the birth and marriage and death records, and you add in the burial information, and you add in those newspaper articles you found, and you add in that immigration record and those military records, together, all of that information doesn't just give you the real picture or the truth as close as we can get it many years later, but it also starts to reveal stories. So I always, always, always want you to view every single record you use: a census record, a death certificate, a find a grave memorial page, somebody else's family tree. I always want you to view it in concert with all the other information and evaluate that information to figure out what's the truth. Now, you might think that on Find a Grave, if there's a photo of a tombstone, then that must be right because it's engraved in stone. But the reality is, even things engraved in stone can be wrong. So you always want to look at it in concert with all the other evidence that you're able to collect about that person. How does a tombstone get carved wrong? Well, there's a lot of ways. If the person who told the person creating the death certificate, the informant on the death certificate, we always want to pay attention to who that is and what's their relationship to this person. Is it their spouse? Is it their son? Is it their daughter-in-law? Is it a grandchild? Is it a name we don't even recognize so that it could be like a neighbor or the person who admitted them to the hospital the day they died? There are a lot of different ways an informant could be related, a lot of different amounts of knowledge that they could have. And again, depending on their relationship to the deceased, their grief in that moment when they are providing that information could be overriding some of the logic of their brain. I have seen a lot of death certificates where when the undertaker asked for the names of the parents, the person gave the names of their parents, not the names of the parents of the deceased. I've seen people get death dates wrong or birth dates wrong, and I've seen them get occupations wrong. Sometimes I've even seen names a little wonky. Usually, the only thing that is 100% accurate in most cases on a death certificate is the information about the death date and place and cause of death. So that is an important thing to keep in mind, is when a death certificate is created, that is a moment of great grief, and we don't know always what the relationship of the informant is to that person. Now, think about all of the things that are then created using that death certificate. Obituaries are often written based on the death certificate. Tombstones are often created using the death certificate. So that death certificate becomes the informant then for those other things that get created. So if the information on the death certificate is wrong about the way the person's name, what the person's name is, or what their birth date is, then that sometimes gets put on the tombstone as if it was the truth carved in stone, when the reality is it just was based on a faulty record. So important to keep that in mind, that is one way that information gets recorded inaccurately on a tombstone. And one of those things we see often is the names and the birth dates. Now, could a death date be wrong on a tombstone? Absolutely. Here's why. Remember, my great-great-great-grandmother in Texas had no tombstone for decades and decades and decades and decades. And then finally, that tombstone was placed within the last 5 years, and it was carved based on information in a ledger that had been copied from information in an original ledger that had been entered at the time of her death. So again, what we see is there are opportunities every time a record gets copied for errors to be introduced. If it's been written down incorrectly the first time, that's the first time an error could be introduced. If it's written correctly the first time, but then gets copied manually, most often by someone just writing or filling information into a form or whatever, gets written into something, okay, that's another opportunity for somebody to transpose numbers or write a number incorrectly or write a number in such a way that then the next person who comes along and reads it misinterprets what's actually written. And so then when the time comes to carve the tombstone, the information could be wrong. So tombstones with death dates can be wrong as well. And some of that has to do with when the tombstone was placed and where the carver got the information in order to fill that information in on the tombstone. So think about that as you view even memorial pages on Find a Grave with photos of the tombstone itself. Now, the other way that possible errors could get introduced is and this is so easy to do, and all of us have done it. As a matter of fact, I spent 4 hours on Sunday unentangling two men with the same name. And in my particular instance, one of them was the uncle and one of them was the nephew. This guy was the youngest brother. His oldest brother named his first son the same thing. And at the time, I thought maybe there's just one person, and really the grandparents raised their grandson. And so I thought maybe there was just one man. And a lot of people online did as well. So there's a Find a Grave page on Family Search in Family Search Family Tree, on 4 or 5 trees on Ancestry, in a couple of census records and the way that they had been attached and were showing up as suggested records and hints on Ancestry. I, for a little while on Sunday, thought there was just one man by this name and that the grandparents had raised him, and that's why he was showing up in the census with them. But then I dove into deeds and discovered there were actually two men with the same name who were born a year apart, year and a half apart. Turns out the nephew was actually older than the uncle, so he wasn't named after his uncle. The grandparents named their son the same thing a couple years later. And I discovered that because they owned different property in different adjacent counties in Illinois, and their wives had different first names. So I started to disentangle these two individuals. But when I went in to Find a Grave, what I uncovered was that everybody had kind of mushed these two men together as if they were the same person. They had all made them the son of the oldest brother, and they had given them both wives. So I got it all cleaned up in my tree. I got it all cleaned up over in Family Search Family Tree. So my next step is to go into Find a Grave and suggest edits that will allow, hopefully, people to create a second memorial page for the uncle, leave all the information here that belongs to the nephew, add the information and move the wife over that belongs to the uncle. So anyone can suggest edits at any time in order to make Find a Grave better. And so it is always evolving. That's the other thing that you need to be aware of, is it is a kind of living, breathing space, which means it's not static, which means you might look at it today and see one thing, you might look at it tomorrow and see something a little different, and hopefully it's always getting better. But that's going to happen as the community of volunteers continue to make those suggested edits, and then those page or memorial managers actually make those changes. Now, you can also upload photos, so you do not have to be a memorial manager to upload a photo. Sometimes memorial pages on Find a Grave get created because they know somebody is buried there, even if they haven't been to the cemetery. So there are a lot of volunteers on Find a Grave who will go through old newspapers and they will see where people are being buried, and they'll create memorial pages based on that information. The reason that is so valuable is because the further back in time you go, the less likely it is that somebody has a death certificate that lists where they were buried. And there are cities and churches and private cemeteries where the owners don't know who all is buried there. And so if nobody has done an inventory of the cemetery, either by going through the tombstones or by going through the ledgers, then they don't know necessarily who's buried there. So volunteers, and a lot of them who are not able to get out and walk cemeteries anymore, or it's the winter months and the cemeteries where they live are buried under feet of snow, this becomes the way that they can continue to volunteer and continue to contribute. So you will see memorial pages that have no tombstone photo. And that then is a way that you can contribute. If you live near that cemetery, if you happen to be there during the spring thaw when everything becomes unburied, you can go out and take photos and upload them for those particular memorial pages. Now, one thing that does need to happen in order for a memorial page to be created is you do need to know where that person is buried. Again, in the terms and conditions on Find a Grave, the purpose of Find a Grave is to just document the final resting place of people. And so you can't just create a memorial page because somebody is dead. You need to create a memorial page that connects them to a burial place. Now, if they've been cremated, if they were buried at sea, there are mechanisms on Find a Grave to document that as well. But we're not just in the business here of documenting the deceased people. We're in the business of documenting where people are buried. Okay. Okay. There are also, you'll see here in the contributions, you can add flowers. So a lot of people will leave virtual flowers on other people's memorial pages. You can create virtual cemeteries. So a virtual cemetery, and you can see here I have one, actually I have two, but one of them I've actually put things in, is just a way for you on Find a Grave to start to collect the memorial pages of your ancestors, wherever they are buried, into a single page for your own use. My virtual cemetery, as you can see, has been set to private because really it's just so I don't have to keep going out and finding my people. I've started to collect their burial places here. There's that great-grandmother who's buried in New Orleans. You can see this is some buried in Pennsylvania and the Presidio in San Francisco, in Forest Lawn Memorial Park, Glendale, California. That's one of the first cemeteries that was documented on Find a Grave. Now you'll notice that several of these have photos of people in addition to photos of tombstones. And that is because in addition to photos of tombstones, you can add photos of people to Find a Grave. So the main profile picture for my great-grandma Cowan here has been set as this lovely picture of her that I have in my possession, and I just think it's so beautiful. But there is also a picture of her tombstone at the Presidio in San Francisco. You can see who added the photo, and then there is another photo of her with two of her grandchildren that you can see there. So then I scroll way down here to the bottom of the page, and you can see who the original creator of this particular tombstone was, or this particular memorial page. In this case, it was the Department of Veteran Affairs. They're buried, my great-grandmother's buried with her husband in a military cemetery. And so they created this memorial page, and then it's managed by or maintained by this individual. So she requested to be the manager. I could, because it's my great-grandmother and Kathy is not related to me, I could request access. I just don't want to be responsible for making edits or paying attention when edits need to be made. So I am not feeling any need to own those. If you want to manage a page, you need to make sure that you are willing to be responsive to people and make edits. You can also see when this memorial was added, and then every Find a Grave has a memorial ID. So those are kind of the anatomy of a Find a Grave memorial page. Now, because Find a Grave is free, you're going to see ads on the page. You can subscribe to Find a Grave, and it will remove ads from pages that you manage. You have the option to contribute to do that. But Find a Grave is a completely free website, so there are going to be ads. Here you can see where people have left flowers. So I left a flower on November of 2017. And then this cousin left a flower on the 10th of May, 2023. And I'll tell you right now, pay attention to who's leaving flowers on your ancestors' virtual memorial pages. Because I saw this, I reached out to this woman, and that's how I found out that for the last 80 years, the family has been having a reunion in Texas. And my dad and I were able to go to that reunion in 2024 because I contacted her and realized they're having a reunion. And that reunion was for this Joanna Caditz's siblings and all their descendants. And we didn't even know that this reunion had been happening. So pay attention to who's leaving flowers on your ancestors' memorial pages, because you never know what the rest of the story is that you might find. Now, the rest of the anatomy of a Find a Grave page looks like this. As a memorial page owner, you can start linking other memorial pages, regardless of where they are buried, to each other in a family structure. And again, this is only as accurate as the information that the memorial page owner knows or is being provided with. So in the case of my uncle and nephew of the same name, I've got to go in and give the memorial manager instructions about how to separate out the family members that don't belong to this guy. But here you can see Julius and Joanna are her parents. These are all of her siblings. And then these are two of her three children. The third one just passed a couple years ago. We don't have a memorial page for her yet because there hasn't been a tombstone placed yet. And then this is her spouse. And so you can click through then from any one of those memorial pages to the memorial page of the family members. In this case, her father is buried in Texas. So she's buried in California, he's buried in Texas. It sometimes will give you the exact lot number. Remember, again, if you have the mobile app, it'll give you the GPS coordinates. If the person who took the photo, when they uploaded it, they did it through the mobile app, or if a volunteer has gone back and just stood in front of the grave and added the GPS coordinates, which is another great way you can volunteer. Now, on some memorial pages, you are also going to find biographical information. That biographical information, again, only as accurate as the person who provided it, but oftentimes it is biographical information, facts that are taken from the obituaries. Now, obituaries in their entirety cannot or should not be published on Find a Grave. They're under copyright. Copyright for obituaries is owned either by the newspaper who published it or by the individual who wrote it, and the laws kind of vary depending, and Ancestry respects copyright. So we never want to upload anything to Find a Grave, to Ancestry, to Fold3. We never want to upload anything unless we're the copyright holder, or we have permission from the copyright holder, or whatever that image or item is out of copyright and has no licensing restrictions. So we want to be really careful about honoring that. What that also means is that you can't just take these photos and use them publicly elsewhere, because photos have inherent copyright. The second the person clicks the photo shutter, that they own the copyright. So we want to be really careful about that. That said, here is the last thing that I will share with you today about Find a Grave, which is that when you are on Ancestry, so since Ancestry owns Find a Grave, we are able to index the memorial pages on Find a Grave. And so there is a Find a Grave memorial page index on Ancestry that gets updated on a fairly regular basis because remember, those pages are not static. They are living things that change and get updated. And so you can see here this updated tag in the card catalog on Ancestry on all of these Find a Grave databases. And that's because these databases get updated. This one for Germany, for example, was originally published in 2014. It was last updated just less than a month ago. Same with the US. The US database was just updated a few weeks ago. The UK database was just updated a few weeks ago as well. Now, you can see also here in the card catalog, all I did was come into the card catalog, search by Find a Grave. It shows me all the individual Find a Grave databases. You can see how many millions of burial locations in each of these places have been documented on Find a Grave. And if it's in a country other than one of these, it will show up in this global database, or if it was a burial at sea or a cremation, those are usually how those are going to appear. These are the databases then, as they get updated and new information gets added, that are getting hinted out to you or that you are finding in your search results. And so my recommendation is that you search these databases or wait until the database gets updated before you save the Find a Grave memorial, because you can save it using this exact record. So here is the record for this Find a Grave memorial as an index entry on Ancestry. And you can see I've saved this record to my family tree, to this person in my tree. And it's going to show up right here. And I can view that. And it's the link between the record on Ancestry, and then from there, I can get directly to the memorial page on Find a Grave. So that's how things get linked together. That's how you're going to search them. But keep in mind that, again, as new memorial pages get added, you're going to want to make sure that you're saving the Ancestry index. And that Ancestry index only gets updated every few months. And so if a memorial gets put on Find a Grave today, it won't be available on Ancestry for a little while. So you can see it, but you can't link it directly through the Ancestry index until that happens. Okay. Okay. So hopefully that answered some of your questions about what Find a Grave is, how you can use it, how you can volunteer, how some of that information gets added and updated and whether or not you can trust it, and then how you find it and link it over on Ancestry. If you have additional questions, please go find this video on YouTube. If you're watching it live, we'll have it posted next week. You can post your questions there on the comments on YouTube, and we'll go through and answer those as we see them come in. But if you're watching this live or recorded, would you please, before you go today, just leave one thing in the chat or in the comments that you learned today about Find a Grave, or we also talked a little bit about record analysis. I would love to hear that so that we can keep making these Wednesday Ancestry virtual events meaningful and helpful for you in your family history journey. Until next time, I'm Krista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.